Hello everyone, it's Professor Reiko here. Today we are continuing on with our cash and receivables chapter, and what we're doing in this video is just an example of bad debt expense in the allowance for doubtful accounts. So the fourth video that we did, we walked through how to value the accounts receivable, the allowance for doubtful accounts, how to record bad debt, how to write things off. Now we're going to kind of just walk through a little bit of this. All right, so we've got a company here, and remember what I pointed out at the end of last video. I said a common mistake is people forget that they had the beginning balance. So notice this one says the company had a $400 credit balance in the allowance for doubtful accounts at December 31st before the current year's adjusting entry. Okay, so that means the balance that's already there is 400, so we need to make sure we account for that. So don't forget that when we do our journal entry. All right, so we said one of the methods is an aging of accounts receivable, where they break things up into how old the receivables are. All right, so what we're looking at here, this is the total receivable balance. All they do here is break it up into current age buckets. All right, that's typically what I refer to them as. And you notice as we get longer or farther away from the point of sale, meaning more over past due, it's more highly, it's a higher percentage that we won't collect. And that makes sense, right? If it's been 90 days or 120 days, the odds of us collecting that money are going down by the minute, okay? So current balances, hopefully we collect a lot of that. And so that's why it's such an advantage to collect things quickly, all right? So typically, we're applying a percent to our receivables balance. So the other method, which I don't do an example of, the composite method, we would just take this 179 right here and multiply it times the percent, and that would be the ending balance on our allowance. Okay. This method, we're going to do the same thing theoretically. We're still taking our receivable balance and multiplying it times the percent. We're just breaking our receivable balance up into all these different age buckets. All right. So meaning we're going to take 140,000 times 1%, which is 1,400. We'll take the 15,000 times the 3, which is 450. 12 times 6 is 720. The 5 times the 12 would be 600. And 7 times 3 is 2,100. All right. So the 5270 is my ending balance. Okay. So remember what we said in the last video. The number that we calculate, maybe I should have this on this video as well, but make sure you go back and look at the end of that last video. And I really stress that the number that you calculate, regardless of what method you're using, is the ending balance in your T account for your allowance. All right, so notice what it says here for Part A. Let's scroll down a little bit so we can see everything here. All right, so for Part A, it says prepare the adjusting journal entry. All right, so this is such an easy test question to ask. It's an easy multiple choice question to ask. If your teacher asked you for the adjusting entry to recognize bad debt expense, before I even look at numbers, I can write this down. Or if it's a multiple choice, I know I'm going to have a debit to bad debt expense and a credit for the allowance for doubtful accounts. I've also seen this called allowance for uncollectible accounts, depending on what your book is, and this uncollectible account expense, but they all mean the same thing. All right, now remember, our allowance, T account. All right, remember this problem said we have a $400 credit before this adjusting journal entry. And then also remember what we said, this number right here is the ending balance. All right, remember this allowance is a contra asset, therefore it needs to be a credit balance. All right, which means my journal entry is 4870. So I'm going to debit 4870, credit the allowance for 4870. That is that credit right there. Okay, so a common mistake here, I've seen it over and over again, is students will put 5270 in their journal entry. All right, which means they've done everything correct except for realizing that this number here is the ending balance, or they forgot to account for the beginning balance. So please do not forget that. Make a mental note of that right now. All right, so Part B here says, assume the same facts above, except for the allowance for doubtful accounts had a $400 debit balance before the current year's provision. Okay, so it says prepare the adjusting journal entry. So like I said previously, if I see prepare the adjusting journal entry to determine my bad debt expense and allowance, I know before I even mess with the numbers that this is my journal entry. Okay, so use that to your advantage, especially if it's part of a problem that you're having to write out. Your teacher probably gives partial credit, so make sure you get, before you even mess with the number, you've got this portion down. All right, so let's reset up our T account. All right, so now we're saying it has a $400 beginning debit balance. All right, so you might be saying, well, how does it have a debit balance if it's a contra asset, which is a credit balance? Well, it can have a debit balance during the year if we wrote off. Remember, every time we write something off, we debit the allowance for doubtful accounts and credit accounts receivable. So if we wrote off more than what was in there during the year, it would be a debit balance, and then we would do this adjusting journal entry to catch it back up. Now remember, my ending balance is still $52.70. That has not changed. So now you can see, to catch things back up, since we wrote off so many during the year, we're going to need a bigger expense, and $56.70 gets us there. Okay, so once again, account for that beginning balance. The number that you calculate using your percentages up at the top is the ending balance in your T account. And then your journal entry, you're just filling in the number that gets you from point A to point B. Another thing students sometimes struggle with, I actually just gave a test, not on this, but something else where students were missing this. If these two numbers, if your beginning balance and ending balance are on the same side, you subtract them. If they're on the different sides, like this debit and this credit, you add them to get the number in the middle. Okay, because think about it. Let's just look down here at this example. If I credit this account for 400, it would bring me to 0. Right? Because I start with a debit balance of 400. So if I credit it for 400, I'm at 0, but I need to be at 52.70. So I need 400 plus 52.70, which is the 56.70 number to get me there. Okay. So little things like that can cause students mistakes. So make sure you're able to do that as far as the adjusting journal entry goes. All right. So you could have a number of different examples like that. If you were using the composite rate up here, like I said, you would have taken the 179 times a percent, and whatever number you got there, that would be the ending balance in your T account. So once again, whatever number you get when you do this calculation up at the top, that's the ending balance in your T account. The adjusting journal entry is the number to get you from the beginning balance that's already there to your ending balance, so you have the correct ending balance when you're preparing your financial statements. All right, so hopefully this helps you kind of understand the allowance. Kind of really pay attention to how much detail your teacher gets into on this. But, if you follow these, you should be able to get these adjusting entries correct. All right, so make sure you use this to your advantage on test time. This could be part of a bigger problem on a test where you're doing multiple journal entries on accounts receivable and things like that. Or it could just be a multiple choice question that says, what is the the entry to record the bad debt expense includes a debit or credit to this or that, and for what amount, and you're essentially just doing this journal entry right here. Okay, so that's any number of ways it could be asked to you come test time. All right, so hopefully this helps. Please subscribe to the channel and make sure you're sharing it with your friends in class. Hopefully it will help them out as well. I appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you next time.